Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Hey everybody, Dan Kent here. Shauna, we're going to give Shauna the week to rest her voice. Boy, what a weekend. I hope some of you were able to join us for the Music Fest this weekend and for the Q&A and for my sermon on Sunday. And I got a lot to talk about, so I want to just get right to it. I want to just do a little summary of my sermon on Sunday. The sermon was called Raveling Truth, and since we've just been on this series Unraveling Truth, I thought the best way to wrap up that series would be to call it Raveling Truth, in the hopes that we could wrap it all up, put a bow on it, and leave everyone with something to think about the whole series and to bring the whole series into some type of useful focus. And to start off with, I wanted to share this clip from the Twilight Zone, and because I kept thinking about this clip from the Twilight Zone as we've been doing this series, and the episode is called 5 Characters in Search of an Exit. It's from 1961, and it's about this army major who wakes up in this round room one time. He has no idea how he got there. He just wakes up in this round, small room. It's like the size of a living room, and there are these 4 other characters there. There's a clown, there's a ballerina, there's a bagpipe player, and there's a hobo. And all of them had the same experience. They just woke up in this place and they have no idea what this place is, where they came from, who they are. And so I just felt like it really captures the sense of thrownness that we have in life. And the word thrownness, that idea comes from Heidegger, from his book, Being and Nothingness. It's not casual reading. It's I read large parts of it. I have no idea what he's even talking about. And I'm a philosophy major. So, for whatever that's worth. But anyway, this clip, it really captured the sense of thrownness. It just captured this sense that we're made for something else. It captures this idea that we're all in this together. And I just thought it was a really fun way to kind of start off this idea as we look at what we've been talking about in this Unraveling Truth series, where we're looking at all these obstacles that people have, between them and God, and the things that are causing people to leave the faith and to leave Jesus and stuff like that. I really worked the whole sermon around this idea of the river of truth, and the river of truth just kind of looks at kind of how these ideas that we talked about kind of relate together. And it starts with the question: is there truth at all? Is truth absolute or is it relative? And once you come to the point where you can trust that there is truth, then you have to ask the question, well, how do I get at that? And so in this series, Emily and I wrestled with science and faith and reason and stuff like that. And then as you go down the river, you've come to trust in truth. You've come to trust your faculties that you can ascertain some truth. And then you float down the river a little bit further and you ask, well, can I know that God exists? And so then you wrestle with that. And we looked at, why people don't believe in God. And Greg offered some arguments about why people do. And he also argued that God is relational. And so we came to trust that God exists and that God is relational. So then you float down the river a little bit more and you see that, God is so relational, in fact, that he actually became a person to have this intimate relationship with humanity. And so he became a human in Jesus. And so then we wrestled with that. Can we trust that Jesus is actually God, like he says? And we came to believe that Jesus is everything that Jesus says he is, and he is everything that the Gospels say he is. In fact, he is doing something here for God. He's rising up this church, this relational kind of body that will be kind of God's kingdom. It will be God's people. And so we looked at some of the challenges with the church, and Cedric and Chris Beckert both kind of offered some insights about how the church keeps people from believing and why we can still trust in what God is doing in the church. And then we looked at the Bible itself. This is where we get our most clear revelation of of Christ on the cross, which is the clearest revelation of who God is. And so we have this special revelation, and we looked at whether or not we can trust that. And Greg, a couple weeks ago, said probably the biggest challenge to trusting in the scripture is the fact that the God of the Old Testament looks very different than the God of the New Testament. And so he argued that despite that, we can in fact trust the Bible. And then what I argued with all of that is you go down that river of truth, you trust in truth, you trust in God, you trust in Jesus, you trust in the Bible. Now what? What do we do with that? And what I argued is that when you go down that river and you get to the Bible, what you find in there is this invitation for us to take all of that trust and to act on it, and to step into this offer that God is offering us in the scriptures, this offer of covenant relationship. God is inviting us into this relationship with God and with his people, and that's what we're supposed to do with it. We're supposed to make the choice to step into that relationship. And so I talked a little bit about the different types of relationships. We're invited into this covenant, and this covenant relationship is very different than kind of most of the relationships that we have in the world. We tend to have contract relationships in the world where God is inviting into this covenant relationship. And really kind of the closest thing that we have to covenant relationships still today are probably marriage covenants. But unfortunately, even marriage covenants have sort of decompensated into sort of pseudo contracts now. But I have this little chart here that if you can pause and look at the difference between covenants and contracts, it's a nice little summary. And then I just, I closed the sermon off by talking about my big doubt, which is just how insignificant planet Earth seems in the universe, and also how insignificant I feel when I recognize how many people there are in the world. And that's even amplified when I realize how many people have existed in the world since the beginning. And it's just, it can be overwhelming to see how many people there are. And it prompts this haunting sort of question, like, can God really care about me? In the midst of all of this, how can I be at all significant? And so I just showed how going back to the river of truth helps me take that doubt, which just swells, especially if I'm in rush hour traffic or if I'm in a stadium and there's 50,000 people in there, that doubt just swells. And so I showed how going back to the river of truth helps me to kind of deflate that doubt and to put it back into its proper size and to put it in its proper context. And that's basically the sermon. I think I hit all of the big things. A couple quick things I want to talk about, though. The first one, I did talk about how we are fundamentally social, and I did a quick nod to my book, Confident Humility, in chapter 8, really focuses on this idea that we are fundamentally social. But just to give you a tease from that, how I introduce that idea is I just ask, imagine if you woke up tomorrow and there was nobody else in the world. It was just you. And you don't know what happened, but everywhere you look, there's nobody anywhere. There's nobody in the stores. There's nobody in cars. There's nobody on the radio. You check social media, nobody's posting anything. And you call all of your friends, nobody answers. And everywhere you go, there's just nobody. And you're the only one there. And now, of course, there's the normal things that happen where, people have been known to kind of go insane if they don't have that human contact. And I think there's a Tom Hanks movie where he gets stranded on an island by himself, and he becomes friends with a volleyball just because he needs that social kind of dimension in his life. Wilson, that was the volleyball's name. But beyond that, if you just think about yourself, if you suddenly were the last person alive, think about, there's a lot of questions to think about, but the question that really kind of elucidates what I'm getting at here is think about how you would view yourself as you came to realize that you are the last person on earth. And like, what would you worry about that your hair looks good? would you suck in your gut? Would you care about a pimple or whatever? Would you really have that whole self-consciousness? I would propose would sort of dissipate if there is nobody else there, because so much of how we view ourselves through the lens of other people. And I just think that's how fundamentally social we are. And the fact that God made us that way, and the fact that God also is fundamentally social, that there's just this deep need, and the importance of the context of others is just so vital to that. So God is calling us into this agape love covenant relationship. Now, that's different than the relationships that we've had. So one of the things I do in the book is I talk about the difference between covenant and contract relationships again. And I have this drawing that I did when I worked at Planet Hollywood, and Planet Hollywood was just nuts back then. This is in the 90s while I was in college. This was when I was in Paul Eddy's covenant class, and I was first learning about corporate solidarity and covenant communities. And as I was like between bussing tables, I decided to take this kids menu and draw this picture on the back of what an agape society would look like. And so if you imagine these circles being people, and these arrows then represent our agape love for one another. And what happens, I think, is as we are in community and we have this agape love for one another, I think that creates this profound bond between us, where each of us have other-oriented, self-sacrificial, choice-based love, or the way I like to say it, other-oriented, choice-based with the potential for self-sacrifice. And when we have that posture toward one another perpetually, trust in a trusting way, where we just naturally are like that state creates, I think, really profound bonds. And that's the type of relationship that covenant relationship is, based on that agape love. Now, of course, we don't live in that type of community. We're called into that community, and God expects us to grow into that, but we're all at various stages of that. And most of us have lived our lives fully entrenched in something very different than that agape love society. We've grown up in what I call contract society. And so just for contrast, I drew what contract society would look like. And you can see, it's just this sort of sad mishmash of certain contractual relationships. It's these sort of transient bonds. There are these shallow sorts of relationships. And you notice how in this type of society, we might find a contract that meets some of our needs and might be beneficial to us, but ultimately everyone is fundamentally alone. And when you look at these two drawings, and I know these are just drawings, but they kind of capture the point. When you look at these two side by side, you just see how strong agape love covenant community is compared to this mishmash of contract society that we're all familiar with. And, that's what we're called into. And when you look at the agape love society, you take any one of those people, and they have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 people are concerned for you. Whereas in contract society, if you find a beneficial contract, you might have one person concerned for you, but that's based on whether or not you can provide value to them in return. And so really in contract society, everybody is fundamentally alone. And that's why God is calling us into something much more profound, much more stable, much more fulfilling, and just much more radical. And it just feels like we're made for this agape love community. The other thing I thought about talking about, but I ended up cutting and going a different direction. I wanted to talk about what is it that creates that bond in that agape love society. And I've done a lot of thinking about this, and the best thing that I found is there's a professor at Yale, and I think he's passed away now, but his name is Robert Sternberg, And I don't remember where I found it. I wish I had this. I think it was like an interview that he had or an article that he wrote or something like that, where he was talking about doing marital counseling. And what he found was that, he would meet these couples and he would get to know each person in the relationship. There'd be Todd and there's Margot, and Todd has a certain personality and Margot has a certain personality. And you talk to them one-on-one, and they're, you get to know them, and for a lot of relationships, that's what you get. You get these two personalities. But sometimes, he said, the relationship was really good, and there was something about the relationship where not only did you have Todd and Margot, but when they were together in the room, it was almost as if there was this third person there. And so he devoted a lot of time and research and study trying to figure out what creates that dynamic, what creates that bond, that third thing. And he developed what's known as the Sternberg triangulation model. And it looks like this. And what he found, and you don't have to remember all of this, it just kind of shows the unifying potential of love relationships. But he said that when couples had really good intimacy, where they trusted one another and they could share things with one another and not feel like that was threatening or anything like that, and when they were committed to one another, they didn't worry about the other one leaving them or anything like that. They just trusted in each other's commitment to one another. And when they had this passion and delight in one another, what he found is that when all three of those aspects were humming along, what happened is it created this sense of bond, and he called it this consummate love, where the two create this third oneness, this kind of like this profound bond like that. Now, he said many relationships didn't have all three. Some relationships just had one that was really strong, and some relationships didn't have any. And that sucks. But he said that when you get all three of these together, that's what creates that bond. And what I would argue is that when God is calling us into agape love relationship, when he's calling us into this covenant, of course, captures this sense of commitment. And when you enter into agape love, you have this passion and delight for the other, and you have this kind of profound security in God's love for you, which means that you can be intimate and vulnerable and not be worried and threatened by anything. And so I believe that it's these agape love covenant relationships that can serve a similar consummate love sort of thing, where the better we get at that and the better our community gets at that, the more unified and the more of a profound bond we can experience. Well, I've talked a lot about a lot of different stuff. I hope that was useful for you. It was a really fun sermon for me, and let me know what you thought of it. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody on the chat. Shauna will be back next week, and we will talk about next weekend's sermon. Keep praying for Greg and Shelly as they are kind of going through some tough physical things. I feel confident that he'll be back soon, and we'll be right, but we're going into this Revelation series, and I don't want anybody else starting this series other than Greg. So he's got to get back, and I trust that with our prayers, he will be back soon, and we can get going on that. With that, I look forward to seeing everybody at 4:00, and which is right now, as you're watching this. And I don't have a good way to end this, so see you later.